I counted 40 Nordic aliens in my field during the 3-Eye Atlas flyby. Their prediction of how humanity ends is now in an FBI file. It began the night the comet came close enough to touch the Earth without touching it at all. I was standing in my cornfield at 11:47 p.m. when I realized the stars had stopped moving. Not that stars move quickly, you understand, but there's a rhythm to the sky, a slow dance most people never notice. That night, the dance stopped. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, and in that silence, I heard something I can only describe as the sound of glass bells ringing underwater. My name is Jacob Stern. I'm 53 years old. I've worked this land in Nebraska since my father died when I was 19. I've seen drought and flood, birth and death, and I thought I'd seen every shade of mystery the Midwest could offer. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what unfolded in those 72 hours when 3-Eye Atlas passed through our solar system. The scientists said it was just another interstellar object, like Oumuamua before it, tumbling through space on its way to nowhere. They were wrong. It wasn't going nowhere. It was coming here, and it wasn't alone. The first one appeared at the edge of my north field, where the corn gives way to prairie grass. I'd gone out with my flashlight because the dogs were acting strange, circling the porch and whining in a way that made my spine tingle. When I reached the fence line, I saw him standing there, tall as a man, but not quite shaped like one, his form seeming to shift between solid and translucent depending on how the moonlight hit him. His skin, if you could call it that, glowed with a pale luminescence, like milk poured over starlight. His hair was long and white gold, moving in a wind I couldn't feel. His eyes were the color of deep water, blue and green and gray all at once, and when he looked at me, I felt something inside my chest crack open, like ice breaking on a river in spring. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The message came through my bones, through my blood, through some ancient part of my brain that remembers when humans still listened to the earth and the sky. He was showing me numbers, 40 of them, 40 beings, standing in formation across my field, arranged in a pattern I couldn't quite see but could somehow feel, like a song played just below the range of hearing. I dropped my flashlight. The beam rolled across the ground, casting wild shadows that danced between the corn stalks. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't pick it up. The being, the Nordic, as I would later learn to call him, took a step forward. His feet barely touched the ground, and where they did, the grass seemed to glow with the same pale light that emanated from his body. He raised one hand, palm forward, and I understood this was not a threat, but a greeting, a gesture of peace older than any language. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and sprint back to the house, to lock the doors, to hide under my bed like a child afraid of thunder. But I couldn't move. Not because I was paralyzed with fear, though fear was certainly there, but because I was paralyzed with recognition. Somewhere deep in my soul, I knew this being. I had always known him. We all have. We just forgot. Time became strange after that. I don't know if I stood there for 5 minutes or 5 hours. The night stretched and compressed like taffy, moments sliding into one another without clear boundaries. The Nordic communicated not with words but with visions, images that appeared directly in my mind with crystalline clarity. I saw the Earth from space, blue and fragile, spinning in the vast darkness. I saw the comet, 3-Eye Atlas, not as a random piece of cosmic debris, but as a ship, a vessel carrying 40 watchers who had been observing humanity since the beginning. I saw ancient civilizations, Mesopotamia and Egypt, and cultures whose names have been lost to time, all receiving visits from these same beings, all recording their encounters in stone and clay and papyrus. I saw a man with kind eyes and calloused hands walking dusty roads in Galilee, teaching and healing, and I understood with sudden, terrible clarity that he had known about the Watchers. He had spoken with them. He had been preparing humanity for this moment. The vision shifted, and I saw the future, or a possible future, unfolding before me like a flower blooming in fast motion. I saw cities of light rising from the desert, structures built not with steel and concrete, but with sound and consciousness. I saw humans, but changed, transformed, their bodies glowing with the same luminescence as the Nordics, their eyes reflecting the same deep cosmic awareness. I saw the sky opening, not like a tear in fabric, but like a door that had always been there, waiting for someone to turn the handle. And I saw others, millions of others, rising to meet what was coming through that door. Some called it rapture, some called it ascension, some called it the next stage of human evolution. The Nordics called it remembering, But then the vision darkened, and I saw another path, a fork in the road where humanity chose differently. I saw wars, not over land or resources, but over the truth, over what was real and what was permitted to be believed. I saw governments suppressing evidence, religious leaders declaring the visitors demonic, scientists dismissing the inexplicable, and ordinary people, good people, people like me, caught in the crossfire between those who wanted to know and those who wanted to control. I saw the earth growing hot, the ice melting, the seas rising, not because of carbon alone, but because of consciousness, because the planet itself was responding to humanity's collective fear and greed. I saw the Nordic standing in my field, his face etched with something that looked like sorrow, and I understood that this was the prediction, the warning they had come to deliver. Humanity stood at a threshold. We could step through or we could turn away, but we couldn't stand still. The choice was coming, ready or not. When the vision ended, I found myself on my knees in the dirt, tears streaming down my face, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The Nordic was gone. All 40 of them were gone. The field was empty except for the corn and the stars and me, a middle-aged farmer who suddenly carried a secret that weighed more than the earth itself. I looked up at the sky and saw 3i Atlas, a bright point of light moving through the constellation Orion, and I whispered a question I already knew the answer to. Why me? The response came not from outside, but from within, from that same deep place where the visions had originated. Because you will listen. Because you will remember. Because when they come asking, you will tell the truth. I stumbled back to the house as dawn began to paint the eastern sky pink and gold. My wife Sarah was already up making coffee in the kitchen, and when she saw me her face went pale. "Jacob," she said, "where have you been? You look like you've seen a ghost." I sat down at the kitchen table, my hands still trembling, and tried to find words for the impossible. I told her about the Nordic, about the 40 watchers, about the visions of humanity's future hanging in the balance. I expected her to call a doctor, to suggest I'd had a stroke or a psychotic break. Instead, she sat down across from me, took my hands in hers and said something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "I know, Jacob. I've been dreaming about them for 3 months. I didn't tell you because I thought I was going crazy, but they're real, aren't they? They're really real." We sat there in silence as the sun rose, drinking coffee that had gone cold, trying to process what it meant that we had both been contacted, both been chosen to receive this message. Sarah was the practical one in our marriage, the one who balanced the checkbook and fixed the tractor when I couldn't figure out what was wrong. If she was having the same experience, if she was seeing the same beings, then this wasn't madness. It was something else entirely, something that demanded action. But what action? What do you do when visitors from beyond the stars show you the end of the world and the beginning of the next one, and then leave you alone in a cornfield to figure out what comes next? The answer came 3 days later, when I got a visit from 2 men in dark suits driving a black sedan with government plates. They showed up at my door at precisely 10 a.m., their faces expressionless, their movements precise and practiced. They said they were from the Department of Agriculture, checking on crop yields and soil quality, but I knew better. I could see it in their eyes, the way they looked at my field, the way they measured the distance to the fence line where I'd seen the Nordic. They asked routine questions about corn production and rainfall, but their real questions were hidden in the pauses, in the way they watched my face when they mentioned unusual lights or atmospheric phenomena. I played dumb. I gave them numbers about bushels per acre and talked about the need for rain, but when they were leaving, the younger one, a man with sharp features and cold grey eyes, turned back and said something that stopped my heart. "Mr. Stern, if you ever see anything unusual, anything at all that seems out of place or unexplainable, we'd appreciate a call. Here's my card." And he handed me a card with no name, just a phone number and a seal I'd never seen before. After they left, I went out to the field where I'd seen the Nordics. I stood in the exact spot where the first one had appeared, and I closed my eyes, trying to feel whatever residual energy might remain. At first, there was nothing but wind and sun and the rustle of corn, but then gradually I became aware of a presence, not visible but palpable, like the feeling of being watched. I opened my eyes and saw just for a moment a shimmer in the air, a distortion like heat waves rising from asphalt, and I understood they were still here, still watching, waiting to see what I would do with the information they'd given me. The government knew, of course they knew. They'd probably known for decades, maybe centuries. The question was what they planned to do about it, and more importantly, what they planned to do about people like me who'd had direct contact. I made a decision then that would change everything. I would document it. I would write down every detail of the encounter, every nuance of the visions, every word of the predictions. I would create a record that couldn't be erased or dismissed, and I would find a way to get it into hands that mattered, hands that would do something with the truth instead of burying it. I went into town that afternoon and bought a notebook, nothing fancy, just a simple spiral-bound pad from the general store. I took it home and started writing, filling page after page with descriptions of the Nordics, their message, the dual futures they'd shown me. I wrote about the feeling of recognition, the sense that I'd known these beings before birth, that they were part of some vast cosmic plan that involved not just humanity, but countless other species scattered across the universe. I wrote about Jesus, about the strange understanding that had flooded through me during the vision, the certainty that his teachings about love and transformation and the kingdom of heaven had been preparing us for exactly this moment, this choice between fear and faith. 3 weeks passed. The comet moved on, continuing its journey through the solar system, and life on the farm returned to its normal rhythms. I planted soybeans in the south field. I fixed the fence where the cattle had knocked it down. I went to church on Sunday and sat in the same pew I'd sat in for 30 years, listening to Pastor Williams talk about grace and redemption. But everything felt different now, like I was watching a play I'd seen before, knowing how it ended while everyone else remained blissfully unaware. Sarah noticed the change in me. "You're quieter," she said one night, as we sat on the porch watching the stars. "It's like part of you is somewhere else." I nodded. Part of me was somewhere else. Part of me was standing in that field watching 40 glowing beings arrange themselves in a pattern that encoded the history and future of human consciousness. Part of me was floating above the earth, seeing it as the Nordics saw it, a jewel of impossible beauty and terrible fragility, a garden where souls came to learn and grow and remember what they'd forgotten. Then one morning I woke up and knew it was time. The knowing came without reason or explanation, just a certainty that settled in my chest like a stone. I took my notebook, now filled with nearly 100 pages of tight handwriting, and I drove to the county seat, to the FBI field office in the federal building downtown. I walked in at 9:15 a.m., approached the receptionist, and said I needed to file a report about a matter of national security. She looked at me skeptically, probably thinking I was another conspiracy theorist or paranoid veteran, but I waited patiently, my notebook clutched in my hands, until an agent came out to see me. His name was Morrison, Special Agent David Morrison, and he had the tired eyes of a man who'd seen too much and believed too little. He led me to a small interview room and asked me to explain why I was there. I told him everything. I showed him the notebook. I described the Nordics in detail, their height, their luminescence, the way they communicated through visions rather than words. I told him about the prediction, about humanity standing at a crossroads, about the choice between transformation and destruction. I told him about the 2 men in suits who'd come to my farm, pretending to be from the Department of Agriculture. And I told him about the feeling I couldn't shake, the certainty that this information needed to be recorded in official channels, needed to be part of the permanent record, because what was coming would affect everyone, and when it happened, people would need to know it had been predicted, had been warned about, had been offered as a choice rather than imposed as fate. Agent Morrison listened without interrupting, his face giving nothing away. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and studied me for a long moment. "Mr. Stern," he finally said, "do you know how many people come into this office every month claiming to have been contacted by aliens?" I shook my head. "Dozens," he said. "Some of them are genuinely disturbed, mentally ill people who need help we can't provide. Some are attention seekers, people whose lives are so empty they need to feel special, chosen, important. And some," he paused, looking at me with those tired eyes, "some are telling the truth. The question is, which category do you fall into?" I met his gaze steadily. "You already know the answer to that," I said, "because you've read reports like mine before. You've got files full of them. Accounts from credible witnesses, pilots and police officers, and ordinary people who saw something they couldn't explain. And you've got a protocol for handling these reports, a system for categorizing them and investigating them, and ultimately suppressing them when they get too close to the truth. So don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. Don't insult my intelligence by acting like this is the first time you've heard any of this." Something flickered in Morrison's eyes, surprise or respect or maybe just recognition. He stood up and said, "Wait here," and left the room, taking my notebook with him. I sat alone in that interview room for 3 hours. No water, no bathroom break, just me and my thoughts and the growing certainty that I'd made a terrible mistake. But I'd come too far to turn back now. When Morrison finally returned, he had a manila folder under his arm and a different expression on his face, harder somehow, more focused. "Mr. Stern," he said, "I'm going to tell you something that officially I'm not telling you. Your report has been classified and forwarded to a special task force that handles cases of this nature. Your notebook is being added to a file that contains similar testimonies from other witnesses who've had encounters with beings matching the description you've provided. This file is kept in a secure facility, and it will remain there unless and until circumstances warrant its disclosure. You will receive no further information about the disposition of your case. You will not discuss this matter with anyone outside your immediate family, and you will contact us immediately if you have any further encounters or experiences. Do you understand?" I understood perfectly. They were burying it. Oh, they were keeping the record, probably because they had to, because somewhere in the vast bureaucracy there were rules about preserving evidence and maintaining files, but they weren't going to do anything with it. They weren't going to investigate. They weren't going to warn the public. They were going to put my testimony in a box with hundreds of others, lock it away in some basement archive, and hope the problem resolved itself or went away or never materialized in the first place. I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and sharp, but I pushed it down. Getting angry wouldn't help. Making demands wouldn't help. All I could do was plant the seed and trust that when the time came, when the prediction began to unfold, someone would remember. Someone would open that file and realize we'd been warned. I drove home in silence, watching the Nebraska landscape roll past, the endless fields of corn and wheat, the small towns with their grain elevators and water towers, the big sky that went on forever in every direction. This was my home, this quiet corner of the world where nothing much happened and nobody expected it to, but something had happened here, something that connected this place to every other place, that linked my small farm to forces and intelligences beyond human comprehension. The Nordics had chosen my field for a reason, just as they'd chosen other fields, other deserts, other mountains across the globe. They were creating a network, a web of witnesses, people who would carry the message forward when the official channels failed, as they surely would. Sarah was waiting for me when I got home. She didn't ask questions, just looked at my face and knew it hadn't gone the way I'd hoped. We sat together on the porch as evening fell, holding hands like we'd done when we first got married, back when the world seemed simpler and the future felt certain. The stars came out one by one, filling the sky with their ancient light. I thought about the Nordics, about where they came from and why they cared about humanity's fate. Were they our ancestors, evolutionary cousins who'd taken a different path millions of years ago? Were they our future selves, time travelers coming back to guide us through a critical juncture? Were they angels, messengers of the divine, proof that the sacred texts had been trying to tell us something true all along? Maybe they were all of these things. Maybe the categories we use to understand reality, the boxes we put things in to make them manageable, were themselves the problem, the limitation we needed to transcend. That night, I dreamed I was back in the field, but this time it was different. The corn was gone, replaced by a garden of impossible beauty, flowers that glowed with their own light, trees that sang with voices like crystal bells. The 40 Nordics stood in their formation, but now I could see the pattern clearly, see how it formed a kind of circuit or antenna, a structure designed to receive and transmit something beyond physical signals. At the center of the formation stood the first Nordic, the one who'd appeared to me that initial night. He looked at me with those deep water eyes, and I felt the message coming through again, stronger this time, clearer. The transformation was not something that would be done to humanity. It was something humanity would choose, each soul making its own decision about whether to step through the door or remain behind. There would be no rapture in the way most people imagined it, no sudden vanishing of the righteous while the wicked were left to suffer. There would only be a choice, offered again and again in 1,000 different ways, until each person decided which future they wanted to inhabit. I woke before dawn, Sarah still sleeping beside me, and I knew with absolute certainty that my role in this wasn't finished. Filing the report had been necessary, but not sufficient. I needed to do more, needed to find others who'd had similar experiences, needed to build a community of witnesses who could support each other when the official world denied what we'd seen. I got up quietly and went to my desk, turned on the computer, and started searching. I typed in phrases like Nordic aliens and tall white beings and interstellar visitors, expecting to find the usual mix of hoaxes and paranoid rants. Instead, I found a network, a loose confederation of people all over the world who'd had encounters remarkably similar to mine. Farmers in Australia, teachers in Japan, fishermen in Norway, police officers in Brazil, all of them describing the same tall, luminous beings with golden hair and blue-green eyes, all of them receiving similar messages about humanity's future and the choice we faced. I reached out to some of them carefully at first, testing to see if they were genuine or delusional or government plants trying to identify and track people like me. Most didn't respond, probably scared or suspicious, but a few wrote back and their stories confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't random. This wasn't isolated. This was a coordinated effort, a campaign being conducted on a scale that defied human comprehension, 40 Nordics appearing to hundreds or thousands of witnesses across the globe, all delivering variations of the same message. The timeline was what struck me most. The encounters had been increasing over the past decade, accelerating as 3I Atlas approached, and then continued even after the comet passed. Whatever schedule the Nordics were following, it wasn't tied to a single celestial event. It was something longer, slower, more patient. One of the people who wrote back was a woman named Elena from Colorado, a high school science teacher who'd seen 3 Nordics while camping in the Rockies. Her description matched mine almost exactly, down to the way they communicated through visions and the feeling of ancient recognition. We started talking regularly, comparing notes, trying to piece together the larger picture from our fragmentary experiences. She told me about a researcher, a former NASA scientist named Dr. Catherine Wells, who'd been quietly collecting testimonies from contactees for 20 years, building a database that now contained over 4,000 documented cases. Eleanor gave me Dr. Wells's contact information, and after a week of internal debate, I called her. Dr. Wells lived in New Mexico, not far from where the first atomic bomb was tested, and when I mentioned this coincidence, she laughed dryly and said it wasn't a coincidence at all. The Nordics had been appearing near nuclear facilities since the 1940s, she explained, monitoring our technological development, particularly our capacity for self-destruction. They seemed especially concerned about nuclear weapons, appearing frequently to military personnel involved in weapons testing or stationed at missile silos. The message in those cases was always the same, a warning about the destructive power humanity had unleashed and a plea to choose a different path. Some of the military witnesses had filed reports. Most had been dismissed or classified. A few had been subjected to intimidation campaigns designed to discredit them or silence them entirely. Dr. Wells invited me to visit her in New Mexico, to add my testimony to her database, and to meet other contactees who gathered at her property twice a year for support and discussion. I told Sarah about the invitation, expecting resistance, expecting her to say it was too dangerous or too crazy or too far from home. Instead, she said, "When do we leave?" We drove out in early October, the cottonwoods turning gold along the Rio Grande, the high desert air crisp and clear. Dr. Wells's property was a small ranch outside Roswell, and yes, she said with a wry smile when I mentioned the location, "I know what you're thinking, but Roswell isn't famous because of what supposedly crashed there in 1947. It's famous because it's a deliberate distraction, a story so tangled in conspiracy theories and government denials that the real encounters happening all around it get dismissed as part of the circus." The gathering was smaller than I expected, maybe 20 people sitting in a circle in Dr. Wells's living room, drinking coffee and talking quietly. They ranged in age from early 20s to late 70s, representing every conceivable background: engineers and artists, veterans and homemakers, atheists and devout believers. The only thing they had in common was the experience, the encounter that had shattered their worldview and left them searching for understanding. Dr. Wells opened the meeting by acknowledging what everyone already knew, that gathering like this was probably being monitored, that some or all of us were likely on government watch lists, but that the risk was worth it because silence was its own form of complicity. If we didn't tell our stories, if we didn't preserve the record and support each other through the fear and doubt, then the suppression would succeed and humanity would face the coming transformation blind and unprepared. One by one, people shared their encounters. A former Air Force pilot described seeing 5 Nordics standing on the wing of his plane at 30,000 feet. Impossible, and yet undeniably real. A pediatric nurse told about treating a child with terminal cancer, who went into complete remission after describing a visit from a beautiful, tall man with glowing skin who touched her forehead and told her she was needed for the future. A truck driver from Montana recounted stopping at a rest area at midnight and finding 40 Nordics arranged in a perfect circle around his vehicle, showing him visions of highways that stretched not across the land, but between stars. Each story added another piece to the puzzle, another thread in the vast tapestry of contact that was unfolding across the world, mostly unnoticed by the mainstream, but deeply significant to those who'd experienced it directly. When my turn came, I told my story plainly, without embellishment or interpretation. I described the night in my field, the 40 Nordics, the visions of dual futures, the prediction about humanity's choice. I told them about filing my report with the FBI and watching it disappear into the classified archives. And I told them about the question that haunted me, the one I couldn't answer, no matter how much I prayed or thought or discussed it with Sarah. If the Nordics could show us the future, if they had the power to heal the sick and appear at 30,000 feet, why didn't they just intervene directly? Why didn't they land on the White House lawn or broadcast a message to everyone on Earth simultaneously? Why this slow, patient campaign of individual contacts, one witness at a time, building a network in the shadows, while the official world remained ignorant or skeptical? Doctor, Wells answered, though her answer raised as many questions as it resolved. Free will, she said. They're respecting our free will. If they landed openly, if they forced the encounter on everyone, it would violate the fundamental principle that consciousness must choose its own evolution. It's not enough for them to change us. We have to choose to change ourselves. That's why they appear to individuals, why they share the message quietly, why they plant seeds rather than imposing solutions. They're inviting us to step forward, to wake up, to remember who we really are. But the choice has to be ours. It always has to be ours. The meeting lasted 6 hours, and by the end, I felt something I hadn't felt since the night of the encounter. Hope. Not naive optimism that everything would work out fine, but genuine hope grounded in the understanding that I wasn't alone, that thousands of people around the world were having similar experiences and drawing similar conclusions, that the message was getting through despite all attempts to suppress or discredit it. We exchanged contact information, promised to stay in touch, and made plans to gather again in 6 months. As Sarah and I drove back to Nebraska through the night, I thought about the word Dr. Wells had used. Remember. The Nordics weren't teaching us something new. They were helping us remember something ancient, something we'd known before we incarnated into these limited physical forms, something about our cosmic origins and our ultimate destiny. The months that followed were strange, a mixture of ordinary farm life and extraordinary spiritual awakening. I planted winter wheat. I repaired the barn roof. I attended church and helped with the food drive and participated in the rhythms of small-town existence. But underneath the surface, everything was different. I started meditating, sitting quietly in the field every morning at dawn, trying to tune into the frequency the Nordics had activated in me. Sometimes I felt their presence, a subtle warmth or tingling, a sense of being observed by benevolent intelligence. Other times there was nothing but wind and birds, and my own thoughts circling endlessly. Sarah joined me sometimes, and we'd sit together in silence, watching the sun rise over the corn, feeling connected not just to each other, but to something vast and ancient and utterly beyond words. We started noticing changes in ourselves and others, small things at first, synchronicities and intuitions that seemed more than coincidence. Sarah would think of an old friend she hadn't talked to in years, and within an hour that friend would call. I'd wake up knowing exactly which piece of equipment would break that day, which field needed attention, what the weather would do despite what the forecast said. Our pastor mentioned during a sermon that he'd been having unusually vivid dreams lately, dreams about angels and ladders and doors opening in the sky, and I saw several people in the congregation nodding, recognizing the imagery. Something was shifting in the collective consciousness, subtle but unmistakable, like the first tremors before an earthquake. Then in late February, I got a call from Agent Morrison. It had been nearly 4 months since I'd filed my report, and I'd assumed I'd never hear from him again. His voice on the phone was tense, careful. "Mr. Stern," he said, "I need you to come to Omaha. There's been a development, and we need to discuss it in person. I can't tell you more over the phone, but it's important. Can you be here tomorrow?" Something in his tone made me agree despite my misgivings. I drove to Omaha the next morning, Sarah insisting on coming with me, and we met Morrison at a coffee shop far from the FBI office deliberately neutral ground. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, dark circles under his eyes, his suit rumpled. He waited until we were seated in a corner booth away from other customers before he spoke. "Your report," Morrison said quietly, "has been declassified. Not publicly, but internally. It's been moved from the suppression file to the active investigation file. Do you understand what that means?" I shook my head. "It means," he continued, "that someone very high up in the intelligence community has decided that the Nordic phenomenon is real, is significant, and requires immediate attention. There are 47 reports almost identical to yours in our database, all describing encounters with the same beings in the same formation, delivering the same message. We've identified correlations with seismic activity, solar storms, and anomalous electromagnetic readings. And we've detected something else, something that wasn't in your report because you couldn't have known about it. The Nordics left something behind in your field, a kind of signature or marker at the quantum level. We found these markers at every encounter site we've been able to examine. They're creating a grid, Mr. Stern, a network of energy points that covers the entire planet." I felt my pulse quicken. "What does it do?" I asked. "This grid," Morrison looked at me with those tired eyes. "We don't know, but the pattern suggests it's designed to receive or transmit something, like a planetary antenna. And the timing of its completion, based on the rate of new encounters and marker placement, coincides with predictions from multiple sources about a global transformation event." Morrison paused, seeming to struggle with what to say next. "Mr. Stern, there are people in my agency who want to shut this down, to destroy the markers or interfere with the grid in some way. They see it as a threat, a potential weapon or invasion mechanism. But there are others, myself included, who believe that would be catastrophic, that the Nordics are here to help us, not harm us, and that interfering with their plan could doom us to the darker future they warned you about. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand that your testimony, your willingness to come forward and file that report, has had real consequences. You've become part of something much larger than yourself." Sarah reached across the table and took my hand. "What do you need from us?" she asked Morrison. He looked at her gratefully. "I need you to continue doing exactly what you've been doing. Document any further encounters. Stay connected with the other contactees, and most importantly, if the transformation begins, if the prediction starts to manifest, I need you to be a voice of calm and reason, to help people understand what's happening and why they shouldn't be afraid, because there will be fear, probably panic, possibly violence. The official response will be confused and contradictory at best, deliberately misleading at worst. People like you, people who've had direct contact and received the message firsthand, will be crucial in helping humanity navigate what's coming." We drove home in thoughtful silence, trying to process what Morrison had told us. The idea that my report, my little spiral notebook filled with handwritten testimony, had somehow influenced policy at the highest levels of government seemed impossible. But the evidence was there in Morrison's desperation, his willingness to break protocol and meet us outside official channels, his admission that there was a faction within the intelligence community that believed in the Nordic message and was trying to protect their mission rather than interfere with it. The battle lines were being drawn, not between humanity and aliens, but within humanity itself, between those who wanted to embrace the transformation and those who wanted to prevent it at any cost. Spring came to Nebraska with its usual drama, tornadoes and thunderstorms and sudden warm days that made the earth remember it was alive. I planted corn again in the north field, walking the same rows where the Nordics had appeared, feeling their presence in the soil, in the air, in the quantum markers Morrison had mentioned. The grid was real. I could sense it now when I meditated, could feel the network of energy connecting my field to others around the world, all pulsing with the same slow rhythm, like a heartbeat or a breath. Sarah felt it too. We'd stand together at the fence line, holding hands, tuning into the frequency, and sometimes we'd catch glimpses of other contactees, brief flashes of connection with people we'd never met, but who were part of the same network, the same vast collaboration between humans and Nordics. In May, Dr. Wells called with urgent news. The encounters were accelerating dramatically. Her database had grown from 4,000 cases to nearly 10,000 in just 6 months. Reports were coming in from every continent, every culture, every demographic. The Nordics were revealing themselves to people who'd never believed in aliens, who'd never given much thought to spiritual matters, who were thoroughly grounded in mainstream reality. They were choosing witnesses strategically, targeting individuals whose testimony would be hardest to dismiss: senior scientists, military commanders, religious leaders, journalists, politicians. The strategy was becoming clear. Build credibility, create undeniable documentation, force the conversation into the mainstream before the transformation began, so that when it happened, enough people would be prepared to accept it rather than resist it. I asked Dr. Wells what she thought the timeline was when the transformation would actually occur. She was quiet for a long moment. Based on the acceleration pattern, she finally said, "I'd estimate we have between 6 months and 2 years. The grid is almost complete. Once it reaches critical mass, once enough markers are in place and enough humans are awakened to the frequency, something will trigger. I don't know what, maybe a solar event, or another cosmic visitor, or simply the activation of the grid itself. But when it happens, it will be unmistakable. Everyone will have to choose, consciously or unconsciously, whether to participate or withdraw, whether to ascend or remain. And it won't be a one-time event, but a process, maybe lasting years or even decades. The Nordics operate on cosmic timescales. What seems fast to us is barely a moment to them. That summer, I watched the corn grow with new awareness, seeing not just plants but consciousness expressing itself through form, reaching toward the sun with the same yearning that drew humans toward the stars. Everything was connected, everything was alive, everything was preparing for the shift. The animals sensed it too, birds flying in unusual formations, cattle standing in circles, dogs howling at empty sky. The earth itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the signal that would release the transformation. I thought often about Jesus during those months, about his teachings on the kingdom of heaven being within us, about the harvest and the separation of wheat from chaff. The metaphors suddenly made sense in a new way. He'd been preparing humanity for this moment 2,000 years ago, planting seeds that would germinate when the time was right, when the Nordics returned to complete the mission he'd begun. In August, I had my second encounter. It happened differently this time. No dramatic appearance in the field at midnight, but a quiet visit during afternoon meditation. I was sitting in my usual spot, eyes closed, breathing deeply, when I felt the presence. I opened my eyes and saw the Nordic standing in front of me, solid and real as the corn, his luminescent skin bright even in full daylight. He smiled, and the smile contained such warmth, such compassion, such deep understanding of human struggle and suffering, that I felt tears running down my face. He didn't speak, but the message came through clearly. The time is close. The grid is nearly complete. Prepare yourself and those around you for the choice. Do not fear. Do not resist. Simply open your heart and remember who you are. Then he did something he hadn't done before. He reached out and touched my forehead with one glowing finger, and in that instant, I saw everything. I saw my soul before birth, planning this incarnation, choosing this lifetime specifically to be here for the transformation. I saw countless other lifetimes on this planet and others, cycles of death and rebirth, each one teaching something essential, preparing me for this moment. I saw the vast cosmic family I belonged to, millions of beings at different stages of evolution, all working together to help younger species like humanity take the next step. I saw the Nordics not as aliens, but as elder siblings, humans who'd evolved millions of years ago and now served as guides for those still climbing the ladder. And I saw the future that was possible if enough people chose transformation, a world of unimaginable beauty and peace, where humanity had finally remembered its divine nature and took its place among the stars as conscious co-creators of reality. The vision ended, and the Nordic was gone, but the clarity remained. I understood now with perfect certainty what my role was, what all the contactees' roles were. We were anchors, holding the frequency steady so others could find it. We were translators, helping people understand that the transformation wasn't something foreign or frightening, but something natural and long-awaited, the next stage in an evolutionary process that had been unfolding since the first spark of consciousness emerged from the cosmic void. We were bridges between the old world and the new, between fear and faith, between separation and unity. And most importantly, we were proof that the impossible was possible, that beings from beyond the stars cared about humanity's fate and were actively working to help us succeed. I told Sarah about the second encounter, about the touch and the vision and the message that the time was close. She listened quietly, then said something that surprised me. "I had an encounter too," she said. Last week, while you were in town, 3 Nordics appeared in the garden. They showed me the same things, Jacob. They showed me our purpose, showed me that we chose this, showed me how beautiful it's going to be when enough people remember. I didn't tell you because I wanted to process it first, to make sure it was real and not just wishful thinking. But it was real as you sitting here now. We held each other for a long time, crying and laughing, feeling the weight and wonder of being chosen for something so momentous. The autumn brought changes that everyone could feel, whether they believed in Nordics or not. The news was full of unusual phenomena, mass bird migrations happening weeks off schedule, unprecedented aurora displays at low latitudes, people reporting dreams with strikingly similar imagery. Scientists struggled to explain the patterns. Religious leaders offered conflicting interpretations, some calling it signs of the end times, others declaring it proof of a new beginning. Governments issued vague statements about atmospheric anomalies and solar activity, carefully avoiding any mention of alien contact, even though the volume of UFO sightings had reached levels that could no longer be dismissed or hidden. The world was waking up, slowly and chaotically, to the reality that something was happening, something that transcended normal categories and demanded new ways of thinking. I stayed in close contact with Dr. Wells and the network of contactees, sharing information and supporting each other through the uncertainty. The consensus was that the trigger point was imminent, that the grid was nearly complete, that any day now the transformation would begin in earnest. But we also understood that the process wouldn't be neat or uniform, that different people would experience it differently, depending on their level of preparation and openness. Some would feel it as a sudden awakening, a flood of cosmic consciousness that permanently altered their perception. Others would experience it more gradually, as a slow unfoldment of abilities and awareness over months or years. And some would resist entirely, would cling to the old paradigm even as it crumbled around them, would choose fear over faith and separation over unity. In October, Morrison called again. His faction within the intelligence community had lost the internal battle. The decision had been made at the highest levels to treat the Nordic phenomenon as a threat and to take active measures to disrupt the grid. He couldn't tell me what those measures were, but he warned me to be careful, to watch for unusual government activity in my area, to document everything and share it with trusted contacts in case something happened to prevent me from communicating. His voice was heavy with defeat. "I tried," he said. "We tried. But the fear is too strong, too deeply embedded in the institutional structures. They can't accept that there might be beings more advanced than us who want to help rather than conquer. They can't conceive of transformation as anything other than loss of control. So they're going to fight it, and people are going to get hurt. And the darker future your Nordics warned about is becoming more likely every day." I felt anger rising again, but also compassion. Morrison and his colleagues were trapped in a system that couldn't adapt fast enough to accommodate reality. They were trying to protect humanity using paradigms that no longer applied, fighting yesterday's war while a completely different future unfolded around them. I thanked him for the warning and promised to stay vigilant. After hanging up, I sat for a long time thinking about the dual futures the Nordics had shown me. Both paths were still possible. Their transformation could happen smoothly, with humanity consciously choosing to evolve, or it could happen chaotically, with massive resistance and suffering before the old structures finally collapsed. The outcome depended on millions of individual choices, including mine, including Sarah's, including everyone who'd had contact and everyone who'd heard the message secondhand, and everyone who would encounter it in the days and months to come. That night, I stood in my field under stars that seemed closer than usual, brighter, more alive. I thought about the prediction that was now in an FBI file somewhere, buried in archives but not forgotten, waiting for the moment when it would be needed as evidence and testimony. I thought about the 40 Nordics who'd stood in this very spot, arranging themselves in a pattern that encoded humanity's possible futures. And I thought about all the ordinary people around the world who were having similar experiences, who were being prepared for the same choice, who would soon face the most important decision any human being could make, whether to cling to what was familiar and dying, or to embrace what was emerging and alive. The transformation was coming, the timeline was accelerating, the choice was imminent. And I, a simple farmer from Nebraska, who'd planted corn and fixed fences and lived an unremarkable life until one night when the stars stopped moving, had been given the privilege and responsibility of bearing witness, of carrying the message, of helping others understand that what looked like an ending was actually a beginning, that what felt like chaos was actually order operating at a scale too vast for human minds to fully comprehend. The Nordics had chosen well. They'd found people who would listen, who would remember, who would tell the truth even when it cost them credibility and comfort. And now the network was complete. The grid was active, and the Earth itself was preparing to birth a new humanity, conscious and awakened and finally, ready to take its place among the cosmic family from which it had never truly been separated. The wind changed 3 days after Morrison's call. It wasn't a weather shift, not the kind you see on the evening forecast with low-pressure fronts and storm warnings. This was something else. The air grew heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on your arms stand up and the fillings in your teeth ache. The birds stopped singing entirely. Even the crickets, who usually roared through the Nebraska nights like a rhythmic tide, fell into a silence so profound it felt like the earth was holding its breath before a scream. I knew they were coming before I saw them. I could feel it in the soil, a deep mechanical shudder that traveled up through the soles of my boots, dissonant and jagged, fighting against the smooth, rhythmic pulse of the Nordic grid. They arrived at dusk, a convoy of 6 black SUVs and 2 heavy transport trucks without markings, rolling down the gravel road that led to my property. They didn't bother with the pretense of being from the Department of Agriculture this time. These men wore tactical gear, their faces obscured by helmets and visors, their movements sharp and aggressive. They set up a perimeter around the north field within 20 minutes, ignoring the no trespassing signs, ignoring me standing on the porch, ignoring the laws of the land they were sworn to protect. They were setting up equipment, large dish-like emitters and generators that hummed with a sickly, low-frequency thrum. They were here to break the connection, to sever the line, to deafen the antenna before the broadcast could begin. Sarah stood beside me, her hand gripping the railing until her knuckles turned white. She wasn't looking at the soldiers, though. She was looking at the sky, above the perimeter lights the military had erected. The stars were beginning to behave strangely. They weren't twinkling, they were pulsing. It was subtle at first, just a rhythmic dimming and brightening, but it was synchronizing with the heartbeat of the land, that deep, ancient thrum that the soldiers' machines were trying to drown out. I walked down the steps. Sarah grabbed my arm. "Jacob, don't. They have orders." I looked at her, and in her eyes I saw the same fear I felt, but behind the fear I saw the steel of the pioneer women who had walked these plains a century ago. "I have orders too," I said gently. "And mine come from much higher up." I walked toward the fence line. A soldier raised his weapon, shouting for me to halt. I stopped 10 yards from the gate. The air between us shimmered, distorted by the clash of frequencies, the artificial, chaotic jamming signal from their machines colliding with the harmonic resonance of the Nordic marker, buried deep in the field. I raised my hands, not in surrender, but in the same gesture the Nordic had used that first night, palms open, facing outward. I wasn't trying to stop them with force. I was trying to anchor the field. I was using my own body, my own consciousness to bridge the gap the military was trying to widen. I closed my eyes and focused on the image of the Nordic, on the feeling of the blue-green eyes, on the vision of the dual futures. "Officer," I shouted, my voice sounding strange in the charged air. "You don't know what you're turning off. This isn't a weapon, it's a lifeboat." The soldier didn't lower his rifle, but he hesitated. I could see it in the way his shoulders tensed. He was scared. He could feel it too, the wrongness of what they were doing, the violation of something sacred. The generators whined louder, climbing in pitch, a sonic drill boring into the fabric of reality. The ground beneath my feet began to tremble, not with an earthquake, but with nausea. The corn stalks withered before my eyes, turning brown and brittle in seconds, as the jamming signal sucked the life force out of the air. They were killing the field to kill the signal. Then the sound changed. It wasn't the generators anymore. It was a tone, pure and crystalline, descending from the zenith. It sounded like a glass harmonica the size of a mountain. The soldiers looked up. The sky was opening. Not physically, the clouds didn't part, but visually the darkness of space seemed to peel back, revealing layers of light that shouldn't have been there. Aurora borealis, in Nebraska, in October, exploding in sheets of violet and gold directly above my farm. But it wasn't random ionization, it was geometry. The lights formed the pattern, the same pattern the 40 Nordics had made in the field. The grid was activating, responding to the attack not with counter-violence, but with amplification. The heavy equipment the military had brought began to spark. Not explosions, but quiet, sizzling failures. The generators coughed and died. The floodlights popped, plunging the field into darkness, except it wasn't dark. The field itself was glowing. Every stalk of corn, every blade of grass, every stone was emitting a soft phosphorescent light. The markers buried in the earth were discharging their stored energy, pushing back against the suppression with a wave of pure, coherent consciousness. I fell to my knees, the intensity of the energy overwhelming my nervous system. It felt like being submerged in warm water, like the moment between waking and sleeping when you remember everything and nothing all at once. The soldiers were panicking. Their radios were dead, emitting only static. Their vehicles wouldn't start. They were stranded in an ocean of light, and then they appeared. Not 40 this time, hundreds. They stepped out of the corn, out of the light, out of the air itself. Tall, luminous, their hair floating in the 0-point wind, their eyes filled with that terrible, beautiful ancient knowing. They didn't attack the soldiers. They simply walked past them, through them, around them, converging on the center of the field where the primary marker lay. They were reinforcing the grid, holding the frequency steady while the earth shifted gears. I saw the soldier who had aimed his rifle at me drop the weapon. He tore off his helmet, his face wet with tears, staring at a Nordic who had paused in front of him. The being reached out and touched the soldier's chest right over the heart. The man collapsed, not in death but in surrender, curling into the fetal position on the glowing ground, sobbing like a child who has finally been found after being lost in the woods for days. It was happening, the separation, the choice. It wasn't about who was good and who was bad. It was about who could withstand the frequency of truth and who would shatter under its weight. Sarah was beside me now, holding my hand. We watched as the sky above the farm became a window. Through it we saw the other locations. We saw the rice paddies in China, the deserts in Namibia, the mountains in Peru. We saw thousands of other glowing fields, thousands of other pillars of light shooting up into the atmosphere, locking together to form a shield, a net, a new atmosphere for a new world. The grid was complete. The disruption attempt had failed, because you cannot disrupt a signal that originates from the soul of the planet itself. The government thought they were fighting aliens. They didn't realize they were fighting the Earth's immune system. The vision expanded. I wasn't just on my farm anymore. I was everywhere. I felt the collective gasp of humanity as the wave hit the population centers. In New York, in Tokyo, in London, people stopped in the streets, looking up at skies that were suddenly filled with impossible colors. The internet went down. The stock markets froze. The power grids flickered and stabilized at a new harmonic. The silence returned, but it wasn't the heavy, fearful silence of before. It was the silence of a church after the hymn ends, the silence of a forest after rain. It was the silence of peace, and in that silence he was there. I don't know if everyone saw him the same way. Maybe the Buddhists saw Buddha, maybe the atheists saw pure fractals of logic, but I saw the man from Galilee. He wasn't walking on clouds or judging the wicked. He was simply standing in the center of the grid, woven into the light, his presence amplifying the signal until it sang in every cell of my body. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The Nordics weren't here to replace him. They were the hosts of heaven. They were the mechanism of the return. The miracle wasn't magic. It was physics of a higher order. The kingdom of heaven wasn't a place you went to when you died. It was a frequency you tuned into while you lived. And we were finally tuning in. The night passed in a blur of light and sound. By dawn, the soldiers were gone. I don't know how they left or where they went. Their trucks were still there, abandoned, engines cold, tires flat. The equipment they had set up was fused into useless lumps of metal, not by heat, but by a molecular reorganization that turned steel into dust. The corn was green again, vibrant, taller than it had been the day before. The air smelled of ozone and roses. Sarah and I sat on the porch, exhausted, our bodies humming with a residual vibration that I knew would never fully go away. We drank water that tasted like wine. We looked at a sun that seemed brighter, cleaner, as if a layer of grime had been wiped off the lens of the world. The days that followed were the beginning of the after. The news, when it came back on, was chaotic. Governments were falling, not by revolution, but by irrelevance. People weren't going to work at the banks or the weapons factories. They were walking out, dazed and smiling, gathering in parks and fields, looking for others who felt the hum. The suppression was over, because the secret was out. You can't hide a star once it rises. The file in the FBI basement, the one with my name on it, didn't matter anymore. The truth wasn't in a file. It was in the eyes of the neighbor who stopped his truck to hug me without saying a word. It was in the way the crops grew without fertilizer. It was in the dreams that everyone started sharing, dreams of school, of learning, of remembering. Dr. Wells called a week later. Her voice sounded 20 years younger. "We did it, Jacob," she whispered. "The critical mass was reached. The timeline has shifted. The darker future, it's gone, dissolved. We're on the new track now. It won't be easy. There's so much to rebuild, so much to unlearn, but we're not doing it alone. The Nordics haven't left," she told me. "They've just stepped back. They're watching, waiting for us to ask for the next lesson. We aren't children anymore. We're graduates. I still farm corn, but I don't sell it to the ethanol plant anymore. I give it away. We all do. The economy of scarcity died the night the sky opened. We're learning how to ask the earth for what we need, and the earth is answering with abundance that defies the old science." Sometimes late at night I walk out to the north field. The markers are dormant now, their job done, but the energy is still there. A soft, warm pulse under the soil. I think about the prediction, how humanity ends. It was true in a way. Humanity did end. The humanity that was afraid, the humanity that hoarded and killed and destroyed, that humanity died that night, and something else was born in the fire of that light. I look up at Orion. The comet is long gone, lost in the deep dark, but the connection remains. I know now that the universe is not empty. It is a crowded room filled with family we haven't met yet. And I know that God is not a distant landlord, but the breath in my lungs, the light in the corn, the hum in the air. I am Jacob Stern. I am a farmer, and I am a witness to the harvest of the soul. If you are hearing this, if you are feeling that strange vibration in your chest, if you look at the stars and feel a homesickness you can't explain, don't be afraid. It just means you're remembering. It means you're waking up. The field is open. The light is on. Welcome home.